Hello, my name is Grace Marie Rosado. I'll be presenting my capstone project. My topic is preventing and detecting white-collar crime, the role of auditors and certified fraud examiners. As far as my introduction, my capstone project explores a proposed solution to address the issue of white-collar crime. I supported my proposal using several resources and statistical data. My overall analysis will consist of the following sections: the statement of the issue, the background, solution, proposal, and budget narrative, multicultural awareness, and consequences and benefits. The statement of the issue. The reason white-collar crime needs to have a proposed solution is because it's a concern to those in the accounting field. White-collar crimes are usually committed by business and government officials who commit fraudulent acts for their own financial gain. This type of fraud can affect a company, investors, and other users of the financial statements. It's estimated the cost of fraud can be up to $300 billion annually, and it's often something that can be hard to detect. One of the main points that I touch upon is that auditors play one of the biggest roles in detecting fraud. It is also an issue because even though there are government regulations in place, there's still room for improvement. So I will discuss how an organization can address the issue of white-collar crime. To give you a little bit of background of white-collar crime, the term was first used by a sociologist named Edwin Sutherland. He stated that white-collar crimes are criminal acts that are committed by a person who is highly respectable and of a higher social class. Within the last decades, there have been numerous cases of illegal activities that are committed by those in positions of power in corporations. In the U.S. alone, there have been cases of illegal acts reported which occur 11% of 1,043 firms that were reviewed since 1970. The study I mentioned only accounts for larger organizations. This percentage would actually be higher if smaller firms were taken into consideration. This study shows that there is an alarming percentage of white-collar crime occurring. And because of Sutherland raising awareness of the issue of white-collar crime, there have been since more efforts to pass laws and regulations that prevent white-collar crime. To give you a bit more background of white-collar crime, again, like I stated, is an issue that raises concerns because it's continuing to increase. White-collar crime affects both nonprofit and private organizations, and the U.S. legislature also play a role to try to pass laws and regulations because they believe it's a matter of public concern. For example, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which address white-collar crime on a global scale. This is one of the acts that they passed to focus on accounting and internal control systems. And also, management is required to meet specific reporting standards, which can lead to the detection of fraud. Now that I have given you a bit more background on the issue of white-collar crime, here's my proposed solution. I recommend that one of the solutions is to form a team of highly skilled auditors, which would include certified fraud examiners. In order to address the issue of white-collar crime, auditors play a role on identifying fraud, and they're able to detect it before it becomes a bigger issue. Another thing I mentioned was that an organization should form an audit committee. This committee would take part of annual audits, and they should have the skill set to conduct fraud investigations effectively. And I specifically mentioned certified fraud examiners because of their versatility. If they were part of an annual audit, this would be beneficial because they have the knowledge and skills to be able to detect fraud. By forming a strong audit committee, they can be helpful against white-collar crimes because they have an expertise and can provide advice to an organization to run their audits more effectively. And to have a successful committee, they should be taking part of ethics training, which can be costly. So this ties in with budget. According to the Association of Talent Development, in 2016, organizations spend about an average of $1,252 per employee for just training and development. In the Americas, the most cost-efficient companies spend about 13 cents or less for every $1,000 of revenue they generate. And this specifically is for internal controls and anything related to internal audits. Organizations or companies that are deemed the most expensive, they spend about $1.40 for every $1,000 of revenue they generate. But when you take into consideration how much revenue these organizations can generate, it could be a high cost for internal audits. However, my proposal shows that it can actually be more costly if fraud and white-collar crime go undetected. So in the end, it's actually more beneficial to invest in better audit committees and efforts to improve internal controls and improve internal audits. Now I'll be addressing multicultural awareness. This addresses all the parties who are affected by my proposal. One of the main groups that are impacted would be shareholders. Shareholders can be affected because they can lose on their investments, and fraud negatively impacts a company, which impacts their financials. They also would have less confidence, and there will be more uncertainty in the performance of a company. So it's possible that investors may not want to invest in the company. And also, others that are affected are anyone that are users of the financial statements. They can doubt that the information that's being provided by a company is even reliable. If they commit fraud and white-collar crime, why would you rely on that information? As a result, investors and creditors will expect more from their investments, and they will want to see higher rates of return. When it comes to multicultural awareness, it's important to be aware of the changes in accounting standards. The accounting field is an ever-changing field, and it changes constant. For example, the PCAOB is a board that wants to protect investors and the public. So they are one of the committees or boards that set up these regulations. In 2017, they are trying to implement new standards, which would require auditors to provide more information on their reports, and this in turn would be useful to anyone that refers to financial statements or audit reports, which would be stakeholders and the public. As a result, it's important for auditors to be familiar and be current with any changes to these standards. Auditors who are aware of the standards, they can minimize the risk for fraud and limit white-collar crime from occurring. Consequences and benefits. It is key that an organization aim to build a strong team of auditors. It is very beneficial. Auditors understand the nature of fraud, and they are familiar with its causes and what controls can be put in place to deter fraudulent activities. And they can also use different techniques to detect fraud once it occurs. The more effective an audit committee is, there's a higher chance that they will detect fraud before a company even suffers much of the losses. Furthermore, certified fraud examiners are considered to be anti-fraud professionals. They have the knowledge and tools to help detect and deter fraud. And also, there's research conducted by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners that indicates that certified fraud examiners on staff uncover fraud about 50% sooner, and organizations experience fraud losses that are 60% smaller than organizations that do not have certified fraud examiners on board. So I went over some of the benefits. So I'm going to also discuss some of the consequences or some of the barriers that one can face if we go with my proposed solution. One of the things that I mentioned briefly is that it can be costly to invest in highly skilled auditors. But again, the benefits outweigh the cost of getting the best auditors. If organizations don't invest on getting the best auditors, they can actually end up losing 5% of its revenues to fraud each year, which is what a typical organization would lose. Another barrier is the constant change in auditing standards. When there's multiple sets of auditing standards, this can be challenging to auditors. They have to make sure that they are complying with these standards. And this can reduce their role because they're more focusing on meeting these standards as opposed to using their judgment to detect fraud. And again, another consequence and barrier to my proposal is that additional training to make sure they're up to date with these standards can be costly and can result in higher costs to a company. But if auditors fail to detect fraud, it can result in more costs than investing in this additional training. In conclusion, there is a high concern with the issue of white-collar crime in the accounting field and how it is actually on the rise. The number of incidents of fraud, the dollar amounts, and the number of companies that are affected have increased. Shareholders and regulators have been putting more pressure on auditors to be able to detect fraud. And we can do this by putting more focus on forming a team of highly skilled auditors, including certified fraud examiners. By doing this, white-collar crime and fraud can be significantly reduced.